How do you look at this as a national security case or a First Amendment case?
Well, that's exactly the question that the justices were wrestling with today. You know, certainly the government was saying, you know, this is not a question about First Amendment speech. It's about the ownership of TikTok and Chinese control of the company that owns it, that company ByteDance being subject to Chinese law, which could force them to cooperate with Chinese intelligence, which could create a national security problem. At least that's the theory behind the law that is being challenged today in the Supreme Court. Of course, TikTok and its users argue that their First Amendment rights to speech, to create and to consume content are being challenged. And it seemed like most of the justices seemed to think that, one, there wasn't a First Amendment problem because in some of the questions, it seems like their opinion was they're not actually, the law doesn't shut down TikTok. It just requires divestment from the Chinese controlled company. So you're not actually closing the public square in which this expression takes place. Also, it seemed like the justices didn't really buy arguments that less draconian measures could achieve the same result as the law that the Biden administration is backing. There were arguments from Noel Francisco, the advocate for TikTok, who said, you know, there could be disclosures made that some of this content could be manipulated by the Chinese government. But the government pushed back hard against those arguments, and it didn't seem like a majority of the justices were buying them. So it seems as if, from the arguments today, that the TikTok divestment requirement will likely stand as constitutional.
Well, so as we consider what the precedent this would set here, Elizabeth, do you have any concerns about what this might mean for other social media platforms, regardless of ownership, about content propagated on them and the First Amendment rights of those who use the platforms who produce that content?
Well, there are some limits to the precedent that would be set if the court does uphold the law with respect to TikTok. And part of that, I think, is because the company ByteDance is not an American company, and so they don't have the same First Amendment rights that a solely U.S. company would have. So in one way, that's a limitation that would be placed on this as a precedent. There certainly would be stronger arguments, I think, for a U.S. company subject to these kinds of laws. And also, of course, you would hope that there wouldn't be these same sort of national security concerns. But, you know, it is definitely an issue of American constitutional principles. One of the arguments made by TikTok and its users today was that, speech that could be critical of the United States or its leadership is something that is deeply protected by the First Amendment, by the right to free speech. You know, we prize ourselves on being able to be critical of our government and to raise our voices in protest. And so the fact that, there might be some manipulation by the Chinese government of content on TikTok to be critical of the United States could be achieved through measures like disclosures, or just the fact that people, through discussion about this case and this law, know that there could be that foreign government manipulation. But I think that even if the court does uphold this particular law, I think that the First Amendment free speech rights and principles could still be heartily advocated for when we are dealing with a solely U.S. social media company.
So how likely is it the High Court delays this deadline, gives some breathing room here, as it now, of course, is scheduled on the eve of the presidential inauguration?
Yes, well, the court did act very quickly after this case came on appeal to it. Normally, after the court gets a petition for review, it takes a while to review it, it takes a while to grant it, it takes a while to brief it, then there's argument, then it takes a while to have the opinion. But here the court got the petition for review in December. It's quickly had a briefing schedule and heard the case this morning, which is, a lightning pace for the Supreme Court. So we expect a ruling to come very soon. Certainly the Trump administration had, and it was supported by TikTok and its users, had pushed for even a pause in the enforcement of this law. The United States in the court today said that, really ByteDance is just playing a game of chicken, trying to delay and delay and delay in order to continue to be able to maintain its ownership in TikTok, and that they've been on notice that they might have to divest since 2020. And so I don't know if there's going to be a delay. I think that it might just be an outright win for the United States.
For our audience with us on Bloomberg TV or on YouTube, you see a live picture of the Roosevelt Room at the White House, where we are expecting President Biden to give some remarks in a few moments pertaining to the economy specifically on this job day, but it could well venture into other areas, including the war in Ukraine or perhaps the fires in Los Angeles. We will bring you his remarks when they begin. But I'd actually like to ask you, Elizabeth, about the man who will be doing things like this from the White House 10 days from now, and that's Donald Trump, who will be taking the oath of office on January 20th and assuming the presidency as officially a convicted felon after his sentencing in the New York hush money case today. But considering that sentence was no probation, no prison time, what do you say to someone who asks, what was the point?
Yes, it certainly was interesting, to have a sentencing that resulted in this unconditional discharge. There's no fine, no jail time, no probation, which is definitely not the kind of treatment that most convicted felons receive from the courts. But I do think there was a principle at stake here that was why it was so important for the sentencing to go forward, to show that the rule of law does apply to President-elect Trump, even though there were clearly limitations placed on that Judge Marchand recognized. And I think the importance of it is also why Trump was fighting so hard to try to stop the sentencing from going forward, because it does mean that he will take office, that he will go down in the history books as being a convicted and sentenced felon when he takes office for his second term.